where you want to go to get your boating needs taken care of. Get that tune-up. Make sure you get a tune-up before you go out on the water and discover that you stalled out and are sitting there waiting for a tow.
You know, I've been to Claves Marina for over the years, and the people there are friendly, they're professional, and man, they know their job. They really do.
Excellent.
So I'd recommend Claves all day long.
Excellent. And now we're going to join on line one Tim Walberg, Representative Tim Walberg. Representative Walberg, for those that you don't know, is an American politician and former pastor, Republican. And what I like about him is that we have in common, we both had the intelligence to name our son Caleb. How you doing?
Okay. Ed, well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Caleb was a really important person in the Old Testament who said, I want that mountain, and he was always moving forward. So hope your son is that way.
Did that name hold true in your son? I believe it means dogged in the Hebrew, and it really applies to my son. I was wondering if it holds true to yours.
Yeah, my Caleb is dogged, that's for sure. And at point in times in his life, that was a challenge. But
yep, I know the feeling.
But, yeah.
Kids. So, welcome aboard. Glad to have you back. I remember the first time that we talked, Mike from Ann Arbor was in here, and I really appreciated the opportunity to ask you some questions that normally you don't get to ask a representative one-on-one. And I've asked listeners to phone in with any questions that they might have for you, particularly about the health care bill and the budget going forward. But even Pastor Rick here has a question for you.
Yeah, actually, it's not on the health care bill. I mean, it's already out of the House now. It's up to the Senate, so I want to go into a different direction. Is the president just signed an executive order pretty much telling the IRS to lay back on the Johnson Amendment? And I've been saying all along, I would love to see somebody in Congress take that up and get that pushed through and taken care of in Congress, eliminated. Is there anything in Congress going on right now that is moving in that direction?
Well, excuse me if I may, along those lines, is there anything stopping you from offering that?
Yeah, well, we have legislation that I've co-sponsored the past several years. Now we have a president that is entirely capable of signing it. Of course, we have to get it through the Senate, and the filibuster issue always is the bugaboo there. But the Freedom of Religion Act, which covers all of that, and covers more, including going into our schools, our colleges, universities. I'm working on that on the Education and Workforce Committee as we reauthorize the Higher Education Act, that we also make sure that the schools like Spring Arbor, for instance, in my district, that have long-standing statement of faith and principles, mission statement that in recent years they've had pushback coming from the federal government on living within their conscience and not being considered going against free speech of others, that we give freedom of religion, as we always have in this country, as it was designed, primacy. And while we don't want people to be mean and nasty, yet we don't want to say, if this is your strongly held belief, whatever it is, in this country we'll honor that, whether we agree with it or not. So those are issues that we're pushing. We'll continue to push in the House. The challenge is getting it to the president, who I'm certain would sign it. The challenge is the Senate, and that's why I encourage people to continue talking to our senators as well, even though some people say it doesn't do us any good. Well, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to try.
Right. Well, I've got good news. I've got a great congressman in my district. His name is Congressman Walberg. I live in your district. And I'm not one to sit here, and I don't want to preach the Constitution to a pastor and to a congressman. But the First Amendment, there's two parts to the religious clause in there. It says Congress shall make no law creating a religion in this country, right? But there's another part that says, nor will it prohibit the free exercise thereof. In other words, Congress will make no law that will prohibit the free exercise of our faith. I think the Johnson Amendment does exactly that. It prohibits us on the pulpit to fight tyranny.
It absolutely does. And that's why, again, I think the president is absolutely right in doing what he did and saying, Lyndon Baines Johnson had his chance. We're going to rescind that. Why? It's in fact, as you know, it's been enforced with no no equality over the past number of years. We know lots of candidates from the left side of the spectrum have walked across platforms, major churches around this country who had the endorsement of the pastor or the bishop or whatever else.
Yeah, I think of that Roman Catholic priest, Father Flagger,
Well, that's one. I'm thinking of a number of black churches and the Clintons for another.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go on and on and on.
All we're saying, and as a former pastor, I believe that my responsibility, even as Harvard University, their original motto was Christ, Church, and Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And they were training pastors at that time so they would be academically excellent. They would know the issues not only related to theology, but economics, education, technology, etc. So when they preached to their congregations and taught them, they could teach a full message to them about, for instance, the value of work and why work was created and what it's supposed to be in your life and what discipline's about and what economics are. And so to say to pastors over the course of the past number of years, you cannot stand up and speak on issues that have great impact upon your values, that's absolutely wrong. When you can't stand up and say or answer a question from a congregant who says, what about Clinton and what about Trump? How am I going to make a decision here? Both of them have some negatives relative to me being a person of faith. How am I going to deal with that? And so for a pastor not to be able to say, well, listen, you look to the Old Testament, you see Daniel, Joseph, Nehemiah, etc., who served under 4 separate heathen kings, and yet each of those kings ultimately did well for Israel because they saw the impact of a person like Daniel stepping up, and it blessed both nations. So to be able to teach people is part of the responsibility of a pastor, and that includes teaching them how to be good citizens. And citizens vote, and citizens take interest in what's going on. So I'm delighted the president did that. I was in the Oval Office with him the other day, and I want to thank him for that.
Here's something you may or may not be aware of is right now, because the church has got to become 501(c), which is a corporation. In the state of Michigan right now, if you violate that pulpit law of speaking out from the pulpit, in Michigan, under Michigan law, because it's under being a corporation, a pastor can actually be thrown in jail for violating that.
Corporations are entities of the state government.
Of the state, yeah. And it's in the Michigan state laws that a pastor, if they are on that pulpit endorsing, can actually get charged with misdemeanor and 90 days in jail.
Well, Representative Walberg, where does that bill stand right now? You've co-sponsored it. Where does it stand? Is it going to the Senate? How's that work?
It's in committee. We've been spending a lot of time on some other issues, as you know.
Oh, really? I hadn't noticed. Well, we can speak about those issues.
The committee's been pretty wrapped up with doing CRAs and, of course, the health care repeal and replace, and now working forward on the tax reform bill. So, but that is in committee. Committees will have hearings on it. On the Higher Education Act reauthorization, that we've just started holding hearings on that. And like I said, one of the primary things that I want to make sure that we have in the accreditation cycle, as well as the full authorization of the act, is that we give religious liberties and to our universities based upon their mission statement. I would jump on one other thing for any pastors that are listening. In talking with a group of pastors a few weeks ago who came to Washington, I said, relative to your 501c3, it's great you have it. It can be very helpful for tax purposes, but I would encourage you to find any way possible to start preparing for a day when you're going to have to give that up.
Well, you've already given that up.
I've given up mine. Yeah. Yes, in our church we've given ours up.
Yeah, and I encourage pastors to think about that. Get their finances of the church in line so they don't have to have that if it were to go away, so that the government can't come in and take away your property. Be as unencumbered as possible.
Right.
Well, wait a minute.
You can speak clearly.
We had no taxation of churches. I was always told that the premise of no taxation for churches was because the ability to tax is the ability to destroy. And consequently, it was deemed that churches would not be taxed because that would be an abridgment of freedom of religion. And I didn't know it had anything to do directly with 501c3, which
it is now.
Which it is now, but prior to the Johnson Amendment, churches still weren't taxed because of that.
Well, the 501c3 has been around an awful long time, and again, that I tell pastors that's easily becomes the idol that sits in the corner of your sanctuary that you don't want to mess with. But in fact, we may have times in this country. We've got a great opportunity now to push back against the collectivist liberalism that was coming in. But it's going to be a battle, as you saw this past week on the Affordable Care Act repeal and replace. As we started it in the House, initially moved forward, it is, I expect to have demonstrations in front of my office. I expect to have demonstrators at my home, and it is going to be an ugly time. So, again, I would say make sure, number one, you do whatever is necessary as a pastor, as a person of faith, a Christian, to be able to stand on your principles and not be encumbered regardless of whether we are free or whether we aren't free.
All right. So, got a question on the health care bill for you, real quick, on the health care bill. A lot of people are crying because the purchasing across state lines was not part of this bill.
It couldn't be.
It couldn't be. Okay. Here's what I want to say is when that becomes part of the bill, that in my mind takes care of the pre-existing clause, because Michigan Blue Cross Blue Shield, not to give them advertising here, they had pre-existing conditions long before Obamacare. If people wanted to come to Michigan and buy from our Blue Cross Blue Shield, they would take care of pre-existing conditions, right?
Because of nonprofit, yeah.
Right. There's a part of me that doesn't even want to talk about the health care bill right now, because as far as I can see, it's going to be a whole different animal than it currently is anyhow by the time it comes back from the Senate. Do you think that's true?
Not necessarily. Don't assume that. This bill that we put out, we were very careful to not cross the line on the Byrd rule, which is the Senate rule, and which we couldn't ask the parliamentarian of the Senate directly. We had to go through senators and Senate staff to pose questions to the parliamentarian about the parts and points and policy of our reconciliation bill. We only have one shot at this reconciliation bill. If it violates the Byrd rule in any way, it throws it all out, and we don't have a second chance. Now, the Senate, they don't have that encumbrance on them. They can offer amendments to our bill, and if the parliamentarian says it does not meet the requirements of the Byrd rule, which allows only revenue or expenditure items to be in a reconciliation bill, they can step back, remove the amendment, and then offer another amendment. So that's why things like the purchase of health care across state lines, because it was more policy than expenditure, we didn't take a chance on it. The Senate can put that in. But otherwise, everything we talked about in our Better Way plan for the past year was in that bill, starting with the main reconciliation portion to repeal the Affordable Care Act, basically, by doing away with the individual and corporate business employer mandate. We did away with taxes in it, almost $1 trillion of tax savings, and all of the rest that went with that bill. And then we added whatever we thought we could get in safely and not violate the Byrd rule as far as policy issues, and that's where health savings accounts expansion was put in it. That's where we put in language to make sure that pre-existing conditions were covered. And so that's there, and though the Senate, some of them are talking about starting their own bill, I think in the end, it's extremely likely that with the negotiations going on with President Trump and the Speaker of the House and Mitch McConnell, that it could be, I think it's more likely than not that they use our bill, they amend it, they make it better, they send it back to us, we conference it, and we send it to the President for signing.
Why did we use the reconciliation? We get one reconciliation a year, is that right?
Right.
Why did we use that on health care instead of on the budget or the continuing resolution?
Because it was more important for several reasons. The continuing resolution was just the ending gasp of the Obama administration. That's how he's carried on the appropriations process for a full 8 years. We've not gone through the 12 bills of the appropriations package for these 8 years. We've had to do CRs, continuing resolutions, omnibuses, cromnibuses, and other buses. That's the only way that would happen, and that's the only way we
That was because of Harry Reid not taking up a budget, right?
Yeah, that was because of him. He had the opportunity to do that, and before he became minority leader, we didn't even have a budget resolution. That's where the reconciliation opportunity comes from. When both houses pass a budget resolution, based upon that, then we have one shot at a reconciliation bill that doesn't have any filibuster opportunity in it. And that only came